What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 480. My name is Marshall, one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the bed, all the way from Cleveland, Ohio, sitting directly across from me and looking a little antsy already. Took his phone away from him again. It's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, what's up, buddy?
I really don't know how I'm going to do the podcast without
You'll
my phone.
You'll be okay. You don't have a computer or a phone in front of you.
I need the show notes is the thing.
No, you really don't. I'm gonna read the show notes and you're gonna be fine. Luis, Mythic Championship 1 is tomorrow morning. You're done. I mean, you've submitted your deck. You've done all the drafts you're gonna do. Are you good to go? You're gonna put on a show?
It's kind of funny how competitive Magic and tournaments work. Like, I feel very confident and prepared for this. Mm-hmm. I've drafted a lot. I ran our limited meeting, actually, for the first time. I've done that.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about that on the show today, in fact.
The constructed deck I'm playing is the one I've tested a pretty good amount. Like, I feel dialed in. I feel like I know what's going on. Still just go 2-4 or whatever, 2-5 tomorrow.
Sure.
Whereas, like, I've done well in tournaments where I haven't felt that prepared. But that's just kind of the part and parcel of being, well, I guess not a professional Magic player anymore since I'm not in the
NPL. You're not in the NPL. You're
so
not
that officially makes me not a professional
You're a challenger.
Magic player.
You're an aspiring.
I suppose I'm an up-and-coming challenger. Scrappy kid from Denver.
You know, they say that for sports, that, like, sometimes the really, really good teams will, like, kind of try to cultivate a locker room environment that's like us against the world.
Yeah,
right?
Underdog mentality.
They call it like the chip on your shoulder, thing. Maybe that's what you need to do because you've been on top for so long.
I can think of almost no better word to describe me than an underdog.
Yeah, sure. So we're going to be having a quick chat with Luis about the limited meeting from Team Channel Fireball. And then we've got a bunch of listener questions. I actually solicited the listeners not for general questions, like when we do our Q&A episode, which we'll do in the next few weeks. You can kind of ask anything you want. But here, this is specific to Ravnica Allegiance because, the Pro Tour is now upon us. You just got done doing the limited meeting. And like you said, like he said, Luis actually ran it this time. So we're going to get your take on anything that's changed or anything that you learned from that. And then we're going to answer our listener questions about Ravnica Allegiance. Before we do, got to mention our sponsor, channelfireball.com. That's the place to go for all things Magic related on the internet. Lots of good stuff about CFB. Awesome free content on the front of the site. And then when you kind of get inspired by the deck that you see or the article that you read, okay, I want to get a box and draft with my friends. It's right there, right on channelfireball.com. And they got some cool stuff. For example, if you spend more than $75 and you live in the United States, you can get free shipping. So that's pretty great. Really helps out if you're going to order a bunch of stuff to just knock down the shipping to 0. And of course, you can sell your cards back to them, which I like to talk about on the show as well. You'll get a 30% bonus on trade-in if you do so. So please do check out channelfireball.com. That is the place to go for everything that you may need. And then, of course, the show is brought to you by you via the Patreon. That's patreon.com/limited resources. And, I've got some stuff here that's kind of collecting dust, so why don't we give it away? First one is a playmat. It's I can't remember what's Sultai Soothsayer, I believe is what the card was.
That was a GP Denver, I believe.
Was it Denver? Was it Nashville?
No, there was a couple cards from cons.
So it might not
Denver
be
/San Jose / whatever.
Okay. So anyway, it was from, I think, one of the team ones. But anyway, it's a cool playmat, and this one is going to go to Mark Donaldson from Washington, D.C. Thank you, Mark, for your support. And then we've got our Crack-A-Pack. And that is going to include, it's one of these special packs. Isn't this pack sweet? Oh, you want to do it. Yeah, you get in there. And
this so really get to do a live Crack-A-Pack.
Yeah, live Crack-A-Pack, and Luis is on it. And this is, again, one of the Mythic edition.
Yeah, is what it's called.
And so it has one of the sweet Planeswalkers in it.
The last Wizards announcement, Matt Sperling, the Magic commentator of note.
Yeah.
Control F for Mythic, and there were 71 instances of the word Mythic. I'm just saying, you know when you say a word a lot, it starts losing its meaning?
Yeah,
well.
I am going to be saying that word a lot. This is the first tournament where it's no longer a Pro Tour and it's a Mythic Championship.
There's a Mythic jar.
Yes, there is. $1 per. We've already got a few bucks in there. I haven't yet, but I guarantee I will. It's just, saying just the word PT or Pro Tour when I'm on the air just is natural to me now, so it's going to be a lot of stuff. All right, what do we got in the pack?
There is a Persistent Petitioners, the mill card, which you can play as many copies as you want, which is text that's true on every card Unlimited, by the way.
Unlimited, yeah.
Not a particularly good card.
No.
There's Rubble.
Do you play it in the High Alert deck?
No.
Me neither.
So, we've talked about this, but my High Alert decks are just cards that are good plus High Alert, not cards that are bad plus High Alert.
Yep.
Rubble Belt Runner, so 3-mana 3/3 can't be blocked by tokens. Perfectly acceptable
Fine.
curb filler, right in the middle of the pack.
It's actually at the beginning of the pack. But.
Oh, yeah. Okay, sure. Prowling Caracol, 2-mana 3/1. Not impressive. I really don't like X1s in this format unless they're intrinsically good. Like, unless they have something else that's propelling them. Sylvan Brush Strider, Kitchen Finks, 3-mana 3/2.
Well, it's half of one.
Was to play game 2, yeah. Not a card I really want. Neither is Thirsting Shade, the 1-mana 1/1
that card I think
3
is just terrible.
Yes, it is very bad.
I've not seen that card.
So is Burn Bright. All your creatures get +2/+0 until end of turn.
Yeah, you know why it's in the set, the Goblin card.
Gathering, yeah.
Yeah, but no.
Oh, we kind of did it. Grasping Thrall. So
Okay.
grasps a lot. This is...
Now, you really, really like this card, right?
So, look, I have to say this. On our last show, we talked about diminishing returns. We talked about how once you have 4 of a card, and I was like, for example, you shouldn't take your 5th Grasping Throw. You should take Grotesque Demise. I then streamed and took Grotesque Demise over my 6th Grasping Throw. I got 7 into that deck, by the way.
Yeah.
So,
What did you run?
6 Grasping Throws. Oh, yeah. I would have run a 7th, too.
Yeah, the card is
But
really
I will say that I was not drafting to optimize for correctness in that particular draft. Once you have 5 Grasping Throws, I was like, I just want to play as many as I can get. If I could get 10, I would have played 10.
Yeah, and I mean...
Not just because it was funny.
Because it's funny, yeah. But I mean, and to be fair, our cap on it was the casting cost. It wasn't related
so here's
to
what
the
I'll say.
effect.
It would have been correct to take Grotesque Demise in that spot. You should definitely have done that, or I should have done that if I was trying to win the most. I do think that if I had 6 Grasping Throws in my pool, I would probably play all 6.
Yeah, that's fine.
The card
you
is
just don't need
very
to play
good.
anything above that. Yeah.
But so far, that's certainly the pick here. Skitter Eel's good. This is the 4-mana 3/3 adapts to a 5/5.
Really like it.
Perfectly solid card. Not as good as Grasping Throw.
No.
Debtor's Transport, 6-mana 5/3 Afterlife 2. Filler. I try not to play this card.
It's meh.
Yeah. Dagger Caster's not bad.
That's
4-mana 2/3.
That's an uncommon.
It's an uncommon, yeah. 4-mana 2/3 that pings all their creatures for 1 and your opponent for 1. It's good as Bladebrand.
Yeah.
And it's just a good card. If Grasping Throw weren't here, I'd probably be taking that. But Grasping Throw is, I think, enough better than Dagger Caster, even as a gold card.
Okay.
Rumbling Ruin, the 6-mana 6/6 that makes their things unable to block.
Card's been a really big flop.
Yeah. Fireblade Artist is not bad. This is a 2-mana 2/2 haste and it can sack a creature on your upkeep to deal 2 to your opponent. Still worse than Grasping Throw.
Yeah, especially the gold cost is real there.
Ooh, our rare is nice. Hallowed Fountain.
Ooh.
Some listener will be glad we opened this,
Yeah.
even though it is certainly much worse than Grasping Throw or Fireblade Artist. In fact, we were having this discussion. The Shocklands are worse than their respective gates. Except Rakdos, except Blood Crypt.
Okay, sure. That makes sense.
But otherwise, I would actually rather have a gate.
How funny is that?
Because of the gate payoffs, yep. And then, of course, the Planeswalker, which is not really part of the pack. Kaya, Orzhov Usurper, which actually is a card in the set, but not one I would take that highly.
No, I was actually talking to this about with some of my coverage guys, and I have lost to that card.
Oh, our conclusion on Kaya was you should put the card in your deck if you ended up with it in your pool, but you should not take it.
Right. It's like there's never a chance where you pick it and feel really great unless it's just super late. But, I was playing one of these really dirtily, really slow, very defensive decks. My opponent played it. And it was like, I can't pressure that, and of course
got a reasonable effect on the game.
and it was like plus, minus, plus.
Sometimes if you're lucky, it'll tick off, it'll pick off like a Footlight Fiend or a Terramander or something like that.
Totally, yeah. Not a card I'm excited by, but that's fine. So you're on Grasping Thrall out of the pack, right?
Yes, Grasping Thrall over Fireblade Artist.
Yeah, I have it over Dagger Caster. Like I would take Dagger
Caster.
Caster over the Fireblade Artist just for the color.
Oh, sure, I would take Dagger Caster over Fireblade Artist also. But I'm saying I would still take Grasping Thrall first.
Me too. Yeah. Plus, that's in the place where I want to be, which we will get into in here. So that's our Cracker Pack. And the winner, by the way, of this Planeswalker, this Kaya Orzhov Usurper, is going to be Lewis Harper from from Grimsby, Great Britain. I don't know how to read the address apparently, but Lewis, thank you so much for your support of the podcast, and I'll figure out how to get that to you. Okay. Few things to cover before we get into our questions. The first one is actually not related to Ravnica Allegiance. I want to get your take on the limited meeting in a minute, but we actually had kind of an interesting thing pop up just a couple of hours ago before we recorded the show, and that's the introduction of at least an attempt at changing the Mulligan rules yet again, and this will be happening at the Magic Fest in London.
Yeah, it'll be the London Mulligan, which sounds better than the Cleveland Mulligan. The Cleveland Mulligan sounds like something you have to pay
Vancouver
for.
Mulligan works. Paris Mulligan, that sounds good. Cleveland Mulligan is...
sounds illicit.
Sounds like you mulled a 5. So tell us what the new Mulligan rule... Now, we don't know that it's going to be the rule going forward, but at least the one that they're going to try out looks like.
So basically, each time you mulligan, you draw 7 cards. Mm-hmm. So you can mulligan as many times as you want, you draw 7 cards. But once you've decided to keep your hand, you put as many cards as the number of times you mulliganed on the bottom of your library. Yeah. So what that means is you start with 7. Let's say you decide to mulligan. You draw 7. You shuffle, right? And you draw 7. And then if you keep that hand, you just put your worst card on the bottom of your deck.
Yeah, the one uncastable card, the extra land you didn't need, whatever.
I have heard that this actually was somewhat inspired by the fact that I mulliganed to 4 in the finals of the last Pro Tour.
Is that true? Like, I've heard that too.
Literally true. Like, I'm not actually making that
I didn't believe it. I'll be like, no way.
No, but I thought
it was such a horrible feel-bad moment. You know, not just because it happened to be but it's just like it shouldn't be decided like that.
Right. The point wasn't that I specifically did that. It was that the finals of
but it does stand out more than
the last Pro Tour was decided by a mulligan to 4. Whereas with this new rule, I believe I would have kept my 6-card hand.
Okay, because that was the closest one.
My 6-card hand had 4 lands in it. Healer's Hawk, Benalish, Marshall.
And you would have had 1 additional card.
But had I drawn the top card and it was a spell and I got to put a land back, I would have 3 land, 3 spell, probably keep it. Okay. So this rule is really powerful. Like, what I mean by
this is a much bigger change than the Scry rule, right?
Yes, this makes mulliganing a lot less painful because basically instead of going 7, 6, 5, even with a Scry, it's 7 choose the best 6, 7 choose the best 5, 7 choose the best 4. There are implications outside of limited. For example, I bought 100 Bazaars of Baghdad today. So as soon as they announced it,
you just pulled out your wallet.
But because mulliganing, you can find one card or one combination even of cards a lot more consistently if your deck is looking for that, like Tron in Modern, right? You know, it's more likely to hit Tron now because it can mulligan to 5 and keep 3 Tron pieces, a Karn, and whatever.
Yeah. So that's considerations for older formats. But what about
our listeners love the purest form of Magic. They love the best form of Magic, and there's no considerations like that. Really, I think it's going to be fantastic for Limited. Okay. I'm very optimistic. I believe that this will make Limited meaningfully better gameplay because if you look at the stats for what happens when you go to 6, what happens when you go to 5, like the percentages just go really high. Like, I know, you're losing like, I think 10% on a mold of 6 and close to like 30% on a mold of 5.
It's like 30 plus or something. It's huge. Like your percentage bombs when you go to 5. And anything above that.
You know how we talk about, keeping in mulligan, sometimes we talk the subject comes up. Yeah. And I've frequently said I just don't like mulliganing limited. Like my bar to mulligan is really high. Yeah. Whereas in constructed, as you saw, you mulligan in constructed when you don't have a good curve. Mm-hmm. You mulligan in constructed when you're like, well, 4 lands is a bit too much for my mono red deck. I'd rather mulligan to 2 land, 4 spells. Yeah. In limited, if your opening hand has 4 land and 3 spells, you never mulligan.
Yeah, you basically just never shift that.
Impossible.
It's interesting. I've developed that same curve over time where I used to mulligan a lot more. Yeah, I used to be like pretty picky, and now it's like I almost never. Like I'm like 2 lands. Here we go.
Here, I think it's significantly less damaging to mulligan when you get to just put your worst card on the bottom out of the original 7.
You're just crafting,
or maybe 2 cards. I mean, yes, you're still going to lose a good percentage when you mulligan because you're going to be down a resource.
What's the risk with making a rule change like this?
The risk is I actually think just for older formats, or not just, but largely for older formats, like there's 2 kinds of risk. One is that the game Magic inherently, this is reducing the variance just by a bit, not too much overall.
Lot, or is it
No, because look, every game of Magic, there's so many points where variance is inserted. Like look at it this way: every time you draw a card off the top of your deck, that's variance, right?
Yeah, of course.
Like, you know how it's actually really funny. This is veering into game design a little bit, but like people hate like flipping coins, right? They hate cards that flip coins or roll dice. Yeah. Drawing a card off the top of your library is just rolling a big die. Yeah. Because how many games is it where you're like, wow, I just need to draw one more pump spell or a creature here or my last burn spell to win the game, and then you do or you don't. Mm-hmm. That's still just rolling a weighted die. It's still just random, Yeah. And it's not actually that different, but it does feel very different from a card that says, like Rakdos that says flip a coin to see what...
It just feels so on the nose when it's just like literally flip a coin.
It's baked in. Yeah. So yes, this doesn't change the overall variance in a game of Magic by like a huge amount, but it does take out some of the variance. Like I believe. Is
that a good thing?
I believe I will win more because of this change.
Right.
Like, I specifically,
I'm wondering if that's a good thing.
It depends on where you're sitting.
Because, like, when I see it, I think it's a good thing. But because I feel like I look at a game where there's no actual magic played by one player, and I don't think that's fun for either player. Sure, there's a win assigned, but doesn't that happen roughly equally to both players over the long term?
No,
maybe even less to the good player because they build better decks.
Basically, I will have fewer. Like again, I'm using myself as an example here because I have a pretty high win percentage, right?
Yeah.
I will have fewer games where I get to do nothing, and games where both players do something, I have an edge. That's been demonstrated.
Yeah.
I have less of an edge in a game where I do nothing, or where anyone if I had a set of games where it's like in these games one of the players fizzled and did nothing. And in these games, both players did something. I would always choose to play the second game.
Of course.
Because I'm advantaged in a fair game of Magic against a random opponent. Right. Obviously, there are other people who are better than me or whatever. But against the average person, I have an edge. Whereas there are some people who, like when you're newer to Magic or when you're less experienced, your win percentage goes up if you said one of the players fizzled.
Right.
But
I mean, as a game designer, like if you were the steward of the game, there's a limit, right? Like you would not eliminate variance from Magic if given the choice.
No, I mean that's veering towards chess, which has some variance, but very, very little,
extremely small.
And
so the question is then how much? And I know we don't have a number on that, but you feel like this is within the safe bounds.
I feel like this is a positive because I think for limited and standard, neither of these formats are reliant on you finding a Bazaar of Baghdad in your opening hand, on you finding 3 Tron pieces or Faithless Looting plus 2 copies of Arclight Phoenix. So that's just not how these formats really tend to come together, especially in limited. It's just not how it happens.
Yeah.
Though your opponent with Ethereal Absolution will get to play it a little bit more often with this hand. Though
but it's still a
6
significant cost.
Well, I guess a better example was your opponent with like a good 3 mana play, like a Gruul Spellbreaker, is a little more likely to play it because if they mulligan to 5, they could still just have a turn 3 Spellbreaker.
Yeah, totally.
That said, this looks like it's going to be really fun. Like it's going to be pleasurable to like mulliganing is unfun.
Yeah.
Right?
Inherently unfun.
And inherently unfun. This is still not going to make mulliganing like, oh yeah, hell yeah, I mulliganed, great.
Yeah.
But it's going to make it a lot more fun because you have a lot more control over the process. Part of the negativity when it comes to mulligan is like, I have to keep this 5 no matter what it is.
Yes.
In limited, if you have a 5-land hand that's 5 lands, you have to keep it.
Yeah.
If you have a 5-land hand that's 1 land, you most of the time have to keep that one too because you're like, well, 1 land and a 2-drop.
I'm not going to 4.
But this gives you a lot more agency there, and agency is important, the control over what's happening. I also don't really care about the effects it has on like the Eternal formats, which is not to say I'm not a fan. I'm clearly like it's been very much demonstrated. I am a fan of these old formats.
Yeah, but
they're resilient formats. If things have to get banned, things have to get banned. If things have to change, they'll change. I think that the way most players kind of relate to the game, this is a positive. And I think we're on a podcast about limited. People listening presumably like limited. Sure. I believe this form is clearly a good thing for limited and people who are fans of limited.
Yeah, so the plan, by the way, that was stated is that they're going to do it at the special Magic Fest that's happening in London, and they're going to kind of gather feedback and then maybe try it out for a little longer, and eventually they'll come down on one side or the other on this is worth keeping and this is how it's going to be going forward, and it's just going to be known as the London Mulligan, or they're going to go back to the drawing board and we'll go back to the Mulligan with a scry. So that's what's happening. Really curious to see where it goes because there's a lot of logistical things too that are hard to encap. Like, does it just take longer? Right? Like if you're like always 7, you have to think a lot more. Does it take less time?
This I believe will take less time.
Yeah, that was my inclination
just less shuffling. You're not going to go to 5 or 4 as often.
Yeah, that was my inclination as well. But like I was talking to Woody about it, and he brought up some interesting points too that I hadn't considered. So yeah. Anyway, okay. So that's the new Mulligan rule or the potential new Mulligan rule. Talk to us about anything that came out of the Ravnica Legion's Team Channel Fireball testing limited meeting that you did this morning.
I thought it went pretty well.
You said you led the charge this time. You were the one laying out the cards and kind of dictating it? Yeah,
so kind of what I wanted to do, and this was with Pat Cox helping me as well, because both of us had both drafted a lot and talked a lot about draft, was instead of doing like a card-by-card ranking, because I didn't feel that that's generally useful, like it's useful to rank the top couple cards of each like color and guild, which is kind of what we did on the show. Actually, the show actually really helped me organize that. So,
double dipping, huh?
Since I know none of the people on my team listen to LR, the listeners actually got a jump on our Pro Tour testing. They heard about it before our team.
Look at that.
But it doesn't matter what the 7th best common is, right? Versus the 6th best versus the 8th best. That doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And I felt like we had gotten a little bit too bogged down in that. So we went guild by guilds, and I think that some of the big takeaways were Blade Juggler's great.
Yep.
Like, everyone was on board for it being the best common for both Orzhov and Rakdos. Staying open is really important. This is like the biggest takeaway. This is the overall biggest thing I think you can do to improve your guild's win percentage is treat Ravnica Allegiance, but it's a guild-based set, so whatever.
Sure.
Treat each draft as with the goal of I'm trying to determine the guild that nobody else is drafting.
Yeah.
And if not nobody else, only one other person.
Yep.
Trying to find the open guild.
And we talked about this, about the guilds being much closer together in this set where we didn't have the Selesnya and the Golgari, where you're like, you just really don't want to be there.
There are some tables, right, in guilds of Ravnica, actual guilds this time, where if you were told Golgari is open, no one else is drafting it, it might not be right to be Golgari.
Still like
you might have a better deck being the second Izzet player.
Yeah.
In Ravnica Allegiance, I don't believe that's the case. If someone were to say,
there is no guild that you hand me what would be considered a good version of that I would be crushed to play.
If someone were to say like, all right, in advance, nobody else is going to draft Simic.
Yeah.
You would just be like, okay, I'm going to draft Simic.
I'm going to draft Simic.
Or Rakdos. Even if I think Rakdos is overall the least good guild, that doesn't mean it's like a bad guild.
No,
it's still very good.
Which is great, by the way, for the draft format.
Right. And this is
But that's why you're emphasizing the staying open.
Exactly. And this is the sort of thing where Paulo said if he got a 5th pick Rakdos Firewheeler, like he would be willing to abandon his first couple picks. Like let's say you end up in a spot where you're like, I took a black card and then 2 Orzhov cards, then an Azorius card. And then I got a 5th pick Firewheeler. He's like, I'm going to throw away everything but the one black card in order to play this, because getting that generally means Rakdos is just open.
Yeah.
And that's a really big thing to look at. We also talked about cards that kind of secretly belong to other guilds, either monocolor cards. Some are obvious, like Rakdos Trumpeter or Twilight Panther, right? Because those literally have off-color activations.
Right.
But it's more like looking at cards like Skatewing Spy, right? The uncommon 2/3 flying.
The Gruul card.
Right. That being more of a Gruul card or even a Simic card, not an Azorius card specifically, even if it's playable there.
Yep.
And I think it's worth keeping in mind like what each guild is looking for, whereas like Simic and Azorius both have kind of a lot of 5-drops. So keeping that in mind when you're looking at, Rampaging Rendhorn or Azorius Night Arbiter, both of which are worse than Chillbringer, when you're in those guilds, it's less important to take a card like that. Sure. Something like Fairy Duelist is much more a Simic card than it is an Azorius card, because Simic has cards like Steeple Creeper or other ground creatures that are going to get into combat a lot, whereas Azorius is like, Senate Courier does not combine well with Fairy Duelist.
Right.
It just isn't a really effective combo.
Yeah.
So it was a good meeting. I think that, we had a lot of good debate on kind of the best cards at each level. Like, for example, the highest tier of uncommons, Consecrate Consume, Shark to Crab, and like the delicious Trollbred.
The notorious TBG.
Yeah, Trollbred Guardian. Followed by Gate Colossus and Gatebreaker Ram. Like, these are some of the premier uncommons. And the way we ranked all the rares is the rares that are above the best uncommons, the rares that are below the best uncommons but better than all the good uncommons, the rares that are below the good uncommons but better than all the commons, and then the rares that are worse than the best commons.
Okay.
So like something like 5 different categories.
And these were just like piles that you put the cards into as you kind of talk things through. Okay.
And that's more pick one, pack one, but it's useful because that's a way for people to use the tribal knowledge of the team to evaluate rares they maybe hadn't played with. It's not like you need, the combined power of Team Channel Fireball and Team Ultra Pro to know if Ethereal Absolution is good.
Right.
But it is worth, actually a decent amount to know, am I supposed to take Sphinx of Foresight over all your best uncommons?
Right.
Right. Or am I supposed to take...
You are, by the way.
You are, yes. I agree. Am I supposed to take Kai's Wrath over all the best uncommons?
Yes.
We actually had no.
No, did you color the colors too much?
Color was too much, so we had Kai's Wrath slightly under.
Because the problem is that I already would lean towards Orzhov.
Yes, I mean I do think Orzhov is still the best.
That's interesting though, because that is still a CCDD card, and that's a major tax. Yeah.
And then
so would I take it over Shark to Crab? It's a great question.
Right. That's
a legit great question.
I'm going to actually see if I can get it tonight, and maybe we'll have it in time for the show. A list of those rares that we can post alongside it.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Yeah.
Did anybody... Two things that I wanted to ask you about. Did anybody have any off the wall stuff? I know Sam's in there. Was there anybody that was like, I know you guys think the format's this, but I just don't, and I think it's this instead?
It was less that and more some preferences like Sam Black really leans towards, Gates and Dovin's Acuity type decks.
Yes.
So we did talk about those, and I think he's a very good resource for those too.
Yeah. He knows those decks really well. He was on those quite early and has shown his chops with that. What about the Gates deck? Come up? I mean, everybody knows it now, but like, basically, will one of you guys end up drafting it, or is it like?
Yeah. So basically, we're very high on Gate Colossus and Gatebreaker Ram because they have really, really high upside, and you don't need to have 7 gates to make them good. Mm-hmm. Colossus is good with as few as 3 gates.
Yeah,
because I think it's just a very intrinsically
just
powerful card.
Good card.
Ram, you want like 4 or 5, but it's very good when you have those.
Yeah.
Whereas something like Gates Ablaze, you need 7+, 8+ gates to make it good, and like 10 to really maximize it. And then Archway Angel, you need probably like 4 or 5 gates,
to make it playable.
We actually had a funny moment in the meeting, which was kind of amusing, where it was like, Sam's like, I really want to gain 4 life off my Angel. And so I'm like, what? How many gates is that? He's like 4 gates. And then Frank Carson was like, no, actually, I think you need 6 gates.
Really?
Yeah.
And you're like, that's Frank Carson.
Yeah,
like,
but
right,
we
buddy.
did clarify. Frank's a stats guy for just underselling it, actually, to call him that.
Yeah, he's a PhD.
Yes.
Yeah.
He where we discussed it, and it's not that Frank was talking about the turn 6 case. Sam was like, I'm fine on turn 10.
Sure.
So there was a little more granularity there, but it was kind of funny having actual Frank. Like, one of the things, I'm always telling people to tag people on Twitter. It's kind of funny. If you have stats questions, Frank loves to answer them.
Yeah, like, he's really good at it.
He already told people, someone already asked him, like, Frank, what's the odds of having a Bizarre Baghdad in your opening hand with the new Mulligan rule? Like, and
he like cracks his knuckles.
He's like, after the Mythic Championship, I'll get right on that.
Yeah, he's going to get
he's going to model it. Like, he actually is, too.
He will. He's crazy.
So, one of the decks I wanted to mention a little bit was the Dovin's Acuity deck, which we've talked about here on the show. But, some of the people on our team are pretty high, and I think it's moving up a little bit in the pick order in terms of
people like it. Yeah. I'm not sure why the late push for that card. I think a lot of people recognize that you don't need 9 instants to make it work.
Like
you need
5 or
like
6.
4 or 5, and you can make it work. What we talked about on the show is still the way that I feel, which is that like it did take me a little while to just get it off of the same plane as Disinformation Campaign and just kind of go, well, what are my expectations for this card? And it turns out if your expectations are, I'm going to draw 1 to 3 extra cards over the course of the game and, gain some extra life, then you can do that quite easily. And then there are times with certain builds and certain styles of deck, like the Clear the Mind strategy and stuff, where you actually get to do it a lot more than that.
We had a kind of funny discussion about Clear the Mind because, a number of us had drafted Clear the Mind decks before. Sam more than anyone else, but other people there had drafted it, and we were talking about it. And Paula, who hadn't drafted it yet, was like, "So how do you know when you want Clear the Mind?" It's like, well, if you don't really have other win conditions, it's like, but no, like, how do you get into the Clear the Mind deck? Are you trying to do this? Is it a backup plan? Is it a fail case? There are opinions diverged a bit. Again, Sam likes it more than most. I see the double Clear the Mind as a substitute for having a good win condition, not an optimal replacement for it.
No, it is. I mean, because if you could just have like a nice rare in that, the Sphinx that you mentioned or something really great in that slot,
Gateway Colossus is perfect for this.
You would just take it. It's just better. Yeah.
But sometimes you don't end up there. And the advantage of Clear the Mind is that you don't need a third pick Clear the Mind. You can almost always wheel them.
It's a 12th pick.
Right. So, and once you get 2, you're like, okay, at this point, I don't have to need to focus on a win condition.
Yeah.
But if a good one comes along, I'd rather have just take out the Clear the Minds.
Yeah.
But it does mean that if you don't find one, you can just Clear the Mind instead.
Yeah, people also, I think, got a little hung up on the extremities of that archetype. Some
people love posting the 0 creature pictures.
Yeah, and it's like you can also just run.
You can just play a Senate Courier and a Chillbringer and an Imperious Oligarch. Yeah, and it's not like you're going to strand that much removal in their hand.
Yeah, like it's just one of these things where you can run a very low amount of creatures if you have enough answers in your deck, but you don't have to run 0. That's not the point of the deck.
So, it was a good meeting.
Good.
I thought
were there any good fights? Anybody? No, you're wrong.
Well, as we'll get to, Bennis wasn't there because...
Yeah, we'll talk about that. One of our listener questions wanted some Bennis stories. And I said, well, that's, I guess, one of them.
Yeah. Ben, when I posted, like, hey, we're going to have our limited meeting at 10, Ben's like 10 a.m. or 10 p.m. It's like... Ben, it's at 10 a.m. The Pro Tour is tomorrow. And then he's like driving down, and he's streaming from his hotel room.
He's actually streaming right now.
Literally right now, which he's sharing with Pat Cox. And Pat's like, Ben, you didn't tell me you were going to stream when we decided a room together. I don't want you streaming from our hotel room.
And then, of course, Ben's like, well, how late can I stream then?
And then they negotiated 10 p.m., so it's ridiculous.
Actually, so then he should be done because it's a little past 10 right now.
All right.
Yeah. All right. Well, as long as you feel ready, we'll keep an eye on you tomorrow. And I'm sure, listeners of the show will be watching the stream to see how you do. And will you be maybe posting a picture of your limited deck after the round's over?
So what I tend to do for those who want to follow is Twitter at LSV. I'll post a picture as soon as the last round of limited is done. Each three, so it's the first 3 rounds tomorrow. I'm going to post a picture of my draft deck. I always like doing that. I think it's cool.
It's fun to follow along too, and you're good at doing it because a lot of people slack on that. It's like, hey, how you doing? You're like, oh, here's my draft deck, and then you don't hear anything for 4 rounds, and it's like,
I like keeping people updated. I'm cognizant that it is a little like. An update every round is a lot of tweets, but I don't play in like tons of tournaments. So I think for the Pro Tour, it's big enough. The Mythic Championship.
Thank you. $1.
I think it is big enough that I don't mind.
Let's get into these listener questions, Luis. First one comes from Jason, who says, "Is there one color that is clearly better in Ravnica Allegiance, like blue was in Guilds of Ravnica?"
Not to the degree that blue was in Guilds, but I believe black is the best color.
Yeah, I think so too.
It just has.
If you just break it down by the commons, especially, it's
the only color that has 2 of the best 5 commons.
Yeah.
It is Grotesque Demise and Blade Juggler.
Yep, and there you go. And those are the top 2 in black. And if you break that down, we brought up white the other time, where you're like, okay, Summary Judgment, that's the best white common, and the next one you're like, Syndicate Messenger. Like it just falls off very sharply, and you'll be able to figure it out pretty quickly from that. Jason. Next is from Jonathan, who says, "Is it just me or is Simic insanely mana hungry in this format?" It's not just you, Jonathan. It is. That is kind of the point, right?
That's the way the mechanic was designed. Like you could do an adapt where the adapt costs are all cheap, but I think that would be less interesting than what they did, which was making them generally expensive. I think creatures that cheap to medium-sized creatures with expensive activators play really well.
Yeah. And, that's also, like, they even weave that into, like, the rare Simic Ascendancy is another card that takes a lot of a lot of mana. There's
mana, money, time. It's all resource. It's all the same
relative,
thing.
Yeah. And, that reminds me of the Gyre Engineer, which Ben is actually very high on. He thinks it's really good. I'm not quite as high as he is on it. I do think it's a solid playable.
I'm dreading
in those
tomorrow because me and a couple of people in the meeting said we weren't super high on Gyre Engineer, and Ben heard about that.
Oh no!
And he's ranting on stream about how good it is, and I know he's going to talk to me tomorrow about it.
And this is like he has had multiple rants on stream, and it's gotten. His rhetoric is like ramping up.
Well, the thing is, Ben started out on a 9 out of the. He started out on probably like a 14 out of the 10 on the hyperbole scale, and now he's going to be at like a 17 or something.
No, he's going to come up and have like a serious chat with you before the tournament.
Unfortunately, Ben has realized the truth of the day and age of entertainment that extreme takes get more views. So. It hasn't dialed him down.
Yeah, it's a dangerous tool. Jake says, "Hey guys, limited environment feels great," which, by the way, I agree with. Yeah, this is.
I like this more than Guild of Ravnica, and I like Guild of Ravnica.
Yeah, same. I'm wondering if you could review some cards again that have impressed you as of late. Another question. I know it's all about a plan, but is that still? But that's still vague enough for me, given my magic prowess. Can you make it more concrete in some point? And he also says, "Good luck, Luis. Always pulling for you."
Well, I appreciate that, Jake.
Yeah, so the first question was some cards. I think we just did that, right? We talked about Doan's Cutie.
Yeah, I think Dead Rebels is a card that, and it is, as I've said before, I want 2 in every Orzhov deck and like 1 in most of my Rakdos decks. And Plate White is another card which has impressed me quite a bit.
Definitely, but only on the beatdown. Like, I don't want any of those in my Orzhov deck. I don't even play it in there.
Oh, I think Beatdown Orzhov is good.
Okay, yeah, if you're doing that.
But I agree that it's not good in the Control Orzhov deck,
Yeah. What about the plan thing? I mean,
so
it doesn't work like that. Like you can't give Jake a solid plan.
You're right, but so there's a couple things to know about limited. First is that most decks, almost every deck, is at its core a mid-range deck, which is why limited is so difficult, because mid-range decks try to play aggressive against more controlling decks and controlling against more aggressive decks.
And you need to be able to switch gears. It's kind of on you to figure out.
Yeah. That's all complicated. But what I mean by having a plan is, like, with the information you have access to, which is like your opening hand and you knowing the contents of your deck, though not knowing which order you're going to draw the cards, you should know what you're trying to work towards. And sometimes it's pretty clear cut. Sometimes it's like, my Orzhov deck has an Ethereal Absolution and a Kaya's Wrath, and all I'm trying to do is live until I can leverage those powerful cards. Or I'm playing a Dovin's Acuity deck with 9 removal spells and 2 Clear Their Minds. Very concrete plan. Actually, it's funny because those decks are harder to draft because they're kind of weird, but I think they're actually easier to play.
They are.
You play the same way every game.
It so heavily
it's just
in one
like,
direction.
oh, they played a creature, kill it. Okay, they played a creature, kill it.
Yeah.
Not hard to figure out.
Yeah.
On the other hand, there's these like mid-range Simic decks that have like an Arrester's Admonition and an Applied Biomancy, and a 4/2 drops, and it's like, well,
and
this
3
deck
of them have Adapt, and you don't
right,
know.
and this deck can attack you, but can also play a slightly slower game because it has these good Adapt creatures. So your plan is going to change, and that's not incongruent with this advice to have a plan, because part of your plan is to reevaluate what's happening every single turn and decide, am I aggressive? Am I controlling? Am I somewhere in the middle? What am I trying to do?
Yeah.
But what I mean by have a plan at its core is whenever you take a game action, do it with intent. Do it with purpose. It's kind of like mindfulness. Like, don't record a podcast while you're looking at your phone the whole time.
Which, by the way, is sitting right over here with me.
It's being present in this game of Magic, and because the way a lot of people play is they just do things. And this is one of the things I want to talk about when I first got on the show.
What I think is really powerful about what you bring to that conceptually is that you can actually retroactively apply that to test yourself.
Yeah.
For example, you can say like, okay, I attack with these creatures, and your opponent goes, okay, blocks, I'm take some damage. And you can kind of time out and go, okay, I attacked with these. Yeah, what am I going, like, is this attack because over the course of the next 3 turns, if I continue to do this, I can kill my opponent? And if you look at it and you go, wait, I only got in for 3, my opponent was at 18, and I just lost a creature. Now you can just apply that directly to, my plan was to get them dead as soon as possible, which I cannot do.
Yeah.
So I'm going to change my plan, right? And that lets you not always have to understand what's happening next, which is the hard part.
Yeah.
You can also look back.
Well, it can help you too, because right before you even take an action where you're like, normally, me attacking with my 4/4 flyer and getting attacked back by your 1/1 token is good exchange. 4 for 1. It's what the show's built on.
Yeah.
But then you all of a sudden, if you look and you're like, well, I'm at 6 and they're at 20. So I win this race, but not by a lot.
Only if it's
And they're playing
happens.
a Rakdos deck, and I'm playing an Azorius deck. And it's like, my late game cards are better, and they have burn spells. That's just not a good attack. I shouldn't make this attack.
Totally.
And that's just like very emblematic of like, what am I trying to accomplish and why? Even though things might change, the next turn you draw Sentinel's Bark that goes ++2 in lifelink, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm getting in there. Also, that gives Vigilance, so that makes it really easy. But like, or you draw like a Chillbringer, or you draw a Ground Blocker, or you draw a Counterspell, and now you're like, oh, with a Counterspell in hand, I can just counter their burn spell, or if they play a big threat.
Yep. And again, like, that's the goal, is to get to the point where you can see ahead and make these plans out ahead of you. But if you find yourself in games where you're doing actions that you don't really understand why you're doing them, it's just like it seemed like the right play, you can simply just look back a little bit and say, well, what did the actions that I took, how did they define as a plan? And if it's incongruent, if you look at it and go, well, that plan doesn't make any sense, I can't actually win, then you need to go back and reevaluate and try to get ahead of it. Because again, the goal is to get to the point where you're seeing ahead of this. Yeah. But I know for a lot of our listeners, they find themselves in the middle of a game and they're like, well, I guess I attack. And if like you could stop time and have Luis show up and go, why? They may be able to look at it and go, well, these are the reasons, but they're not good and I shouldn't do it. And you're like, that's right. And then Luis disappears and everything goes. It's good to be able to have a test. As long as they don't look
like the new genie like Will Smith in the Aladdin movie.
For the sake of the listener who you just stopped in, and I hope not, yeah. But the having a plan is almost a way of life, like a mentality.
It's
rather
basically just
than
justify all your actions.
Yep.
And if you can't, then think about why you can't.
Yes.
And if you then still can't, maybe you shouldn't be doing the thing you're doing.
On the wrong plan, yeah.
Why are you buying those chips? It's like, you're not really hungry. You just want to eat something.
Yeah. Well, my plan was to eat them.
I really can't justify this, can I?
Yes. David says, this set seems to make it easier to splash than most sets, and the payoffs for splashing seem better. Would you say that this is true? And if so, are there any color combinations that aren't worth splashing into? And by the way, David's question covers, there was a few people that asked about playing wedges and splashing around and stuff. And David's right. It felt like when we were in Guilds of Ravnica, that we were going to be playing 3-color decks more because it's just all there for us. The lockets, the gates, and then the overlaps. You know, they call it a wedge when you take 2 of the guilds that are next to each other on the color pie. But it didn't work. Like we were like, if I was Demir, I would like maybe want a hypothesis or whatever. But I had all the tools I needed to win the game in most of the 2-color pairs. Here, that's not the case. I am routinely playing 3 colors. It is super common for me to dip into a 3rd color. And so, David, yes, I do think that it is easier to splash, although technically it's exactly the same, right? Like we have all the same tools we had.
The guilds are just a little more streamlined in guilds, I think.
Yeah, but here, like you are more incentivized to reach out and splash. So yes, I do believe that's true. Are there any color combinations that aren't worth splashing into?
Basically, I think when you're Rakdos base, you're less likely to want to splash.
I don't splash even good green cards, and I'd like to have Savage Smash in my Rakdos deck. I don't do it.
So Rakdos base doesn't want to splash that much, and Orzhov base actively does tend to want to splash.
Yes, those are the most. And then even though you might look at Gruul and think, well, that's an aggressive deck, I don't want to splash. It actually plays really nicely as a mid-range deck, and if you're splashing blue, it ends up being very mid-range, so that happens
So basically,
quite
I think the 2 most common wedges are Temur, so red, blue, green, and Esper, black, white, blue. Yep. And those are not even necessarily always the same base.
Right. But the one that I don't do is Jund.
Mardu and Jund, I think, are the two least likely.
Yep. Thanks for the question, David. Alex says, hey, Marshall and Luis, first I wanted to say, oh, and we should mention this. I'm glad you're both doing CFB coverage. It makes me happy, he says. So
yeah, we're going to be doing coverage of Grand Prix Los Angeles next week on twitch.tv/channel Fireball.
Yeah.
I mean, I do want to get the word out, though, because we don't have as many shots this year. Like, compared to last year, right now we're slated to do 5 events, LA being one of those 5. And, I think how we do that weekend could impact future decisions.
Sure. So, and that's, given, changes to the OP system from Wizards of the Coast side. And this is pretty cool. I mean, CFB stepping it up, and we get to do some coverage at some GPs this year. And, from my seat, that's really exciting. I mean,
yeah, and even though the commentary pairs are me and Riley and you and Huey, we might get LR on the booth for 1 or 2 rounds. We'll see.
That'd be sweet. I'd like that. We should do it. So Alex's question is, I'm wondering how you see the Gates deck working out in paper. I rarely get to do Busted Gates deck in paper as I do on Arena, but in preparation for the Mythic Championship, how do you value the Gate payoffs? This is interesting because I've drafted it in paper 3 times now, and that's in not that many paper drafts, but also I was on it really early.
Yeah.
You are right, Alec. It does not.
If you draft the Gates deck routinely on Arena, you are spoiling yourself for paper.
Yes.
Because they do not look the same.
It does not.
You can't get 4 payoffs and 10 gates.
No.
It's just not going to happen.
You end up getting 2
to 3.
Maybe 3, and you usually end up getting 8, 9 gates, something like that. And it turns out that's still not bad.
It's still good enough.
It's a good deck, but you do want to narrow down your color.
You're just not going to end up with these disgusting 2 Rams, Gates of Blaze, Gate Colossus, Archway, Angel, 11 gate decks. That's just not it's not going to happen in paper.
Right. And so that's the big adjustment that you have to make. And I'm assuming, that's your assumption going in as well. The interesting part, of course, though, is the nature of draft, which is self-correcting. And if everybody at your table is you can't touch the Gates deck.
You're just not going to see a 6-pick Gate Colossus. That's just not going to happen.
No. The funny part, though, is that it gets really interesting because of how easy it is to see. Because if somebody is prioritizing actual gates, that stands out. Like if I did a paper draft where I was in gates and, my 6th pick had no gate in it. And I thought, uh-oh. Right. And it didn't end up being the case. They just took it for their deck and I ended up with enough gates. But prioritizing, when you don't need to prioritize gates, the deck's pretty easy to get. And when you do, it's different. So everybody wants them. Antonio says, I find black to be the deepest, either Orzhov or Rakdos, with Blade Jugglers, Ill-Gotten Inheritance, and Dead Revels. I haven't had much success with the other guilds or the Gates deck. Does it pay to go green in this format, and how?
Yeah, green is a perfectly fine color. Yeah. I think that both Simic and Gruul have their merits, and green has some of the best uncommons. Shark to Crab and Trollbred Guardian are both top of the list for uncommons, and those are both green. The green does not have as much as the 5-color aspect as it has in some sets, or just because just open the gates isn't enough to really make that deck. But I don't see any intrinsic reason not to draft green. If you're really comfortable with black, try to force yourself not to draft it for a couple drafts just to get more experience.
Yeah, the interesting part too is that, and for Antonio's question here, is the answer is kind of similar to the prior one, is that draft is self-correcting.
Yeah.
So, if you want to know, does it pay to go into green? It pays to go into the open color, and if that's green, off you go. Jason says, what's a minimum number of toughness greater than power creatures you need to feel comfortable playing high alert?
I would basically want something like 5 creatures that get meaningfully improved by high alert, and ideally like 7.
Yeah. Well, ideally like all of them.
Well, basically...
But like you said, you don't actually do that. Like, you're not running the junk drawer.
No, I'm not. If I have 2 high alerts, I might sneak 1 or 2 in, but in the like kind of average Azorius deck with 1 high alert, if I have like 2 Senate Couriers, an Azorius Lawbringer, a Concordia Pegasus, and like 1 other card, then it's usually fine. That's enough to make my creatures tick. You don't need to go completely nuts, but once you have 2, the floodgates do open a little bit.
Yeah, and I think you actually are pretty incentivized to build
also
around it.
When I say meaningfully improve, I mean meaningfully improve. Like, Fairy Duelist gets marginally improved. Like, yes, a 2/2 is better than a 1/1, but
Senate Couriers.
But Senate Couriers is where you want to do it.
That's where you want to do it. Gar Colbert says, a couple of questions. One, typically enchantments, because they don't impact the board state the turn you play them, are pretty bad and limited. And that's a generalization, but I know which ones Gar's referring to. In this set, there seems to be some good ones. Heck, even the Aura's good. You talked about High Alert and Ill-Gotten Inheritance on the last show. Can you talk about some of the others and how we should evaluate them as build-arounds for this set?
So we mentioned Dovin's Acuity earlier in the set.
Yeah.
Or earlier in the show.
There's a
Guardian Project at Rare.
Yes, which I like.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
It's not busted. Like, this is the enchantment for 3 and a green.
Calamity. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Which draws you a card whenever you play a creature that isn't in play, or basically whenever you play a new creature, like one that you don't have another copy of.
Yeah.
That card's fine. I think Cavalcade of Calamity is pretty bad. I would generally advise against it.
I have yet to lose to it.
Yes.
So that's probably not good for that card. I don't know. What are the others? I could look.
Wilderness Reclamation in Civic.
I did try it out, by the way, the other day on stream.
It has merits.
I think it theoretically does, but I still think like, even after having played it and in a deck that had Simic Ascendancy and theoretically would be good, I still just think Axebane Beast is just going to bump my win percentage higher. It was so awful in so many spots that the times when I did get to go off, it was like, whatever. I felt like I could just go off anyway.
It is the kind of card that has a very high end.
Yeah. You'd think so. I think I'm off of it. Gar's second question, somewhat related. Owen talked about not putting negative synergies in a deck. He talked about this when he was on the show. Sage's Rose Savant, the 2/1 that scries 2, doesn't seem to synergize with High Alert, yet it helps you find your High Alerts, hopefully, in your High Alert deck. So given the choice, late in the draft between that and, say, Petitioners or a Pegasus, how would you make that decision given your build around?
Well, this doesn't really answer the question exactly, where Pegasus I would take because it's good with High Alert, but that has more to do with Pegasus and High Alert. Mm-hmm. A better example is, yes, Sage's Rose Savant versus like an Impassioned Orator or something that isn't impacted negatively by High Alert but doesn't really have any synergy with it. I would still take Sage's Rose Savant. I don't think the downgrade from 2/1 to 1/1 essentially is very big.
Yeah, you're really playing it for the scribe.
I played Vizcopa Vampire in a High Alert deck because this is a 3/1 lifelink. Because yes, when High Alert out, it shrinks it, but that card just doesn't live very often.
Yeah, it almost always.
It's part of the reason I actually don't like it because I think it dies too often.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter too much. On the flip side, like, I wouldn't want to play like 6 creatures that get downgraded by High Alert. That's questionable. Mm-hmm. But I think that it really depends on both the power level of the individual cards and the power level of or how bad it is when they're both combined.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that you actually have to evaluate it for each deck that way.
Yeah, and I would generally play 2 cards that are both individually powerful, even if they have a bit of a negative synergy. It just depends on how big that is.
Yeah, the times that you draw both are the only times you really get punished, and you have a lot of control over when you play them. Those questions, by the way, were from Gar and Gwendolyn. Thank you, guys. Peter says, is Dimir actually a viable archetype in this set?
No, we were kind of joking about it because multiple of us had drafted it.
Yeah, BDM did.
Yeah.
He brought it up to me, and then you drafted it, and he's like, did you talk to him about it? I was like, no, that was all him.
Yeah. I don't think it's actually
not a thing,
good.
Right? No.
Basically,
the cost is too high. You're giving up all the cold cards.
If blue and black, if I knew for a fact that nobody, within 2 seats of me in either direction are drafting blue or black, I would still probably just choose a different guild.
Yeah, you just take the good blue.
It's just funny if you get a bunch of blade jugglers and chillbringers.
It is funny because,
Fairy Duelist and the blade juggler is a curve.
It is. Yeah, sure. And they actually do work, yeah. But it is interesting because when you look at the commons that are monocolored in that situation, those cards do hold up. Like you could say, wow, these are really good. I can actually make a deck here. But missing out on gold cards in a set like this is so devastating that it's just not worth it.
It is generally not.
Yeah. Mediocre Magic Man says, do you think it's ever correct to build out of guild? I had a train wreck draft that turned halfway into pack 2, and I realized I was mostly Dimir. I leaned into it and splashed white for Mortify and Law Mage's Binding. It did pretty well, but not sure if it was right or if I would have been better off committing to Azorius or Orzhov, even though it would have cut me off from several of my best playables.
Yeah, I think in general you shouldn't be off guild. Yeah. Like, some weird stuff can happen if you're like, well, I open Biogenic Ooze, in my late in the draft, and I have all good black cards. Is it Golgari time? And the answer is still probably no.
Probably no. It's devastating. Should not be able to play a card that good. But Keith wins. This isn't really a question, or Keith got cut off somehow, but it says, hi guys, you've helped me a lot as a drafter, and I've even been teaching a friend how to draft with your ideas. Parentheses, I knew I created a monster when she decided she liked blue because people like to cast their creatures. She gets to help them double their fun by bouncing their creatures back to their hand and casting them again. That was also the end of the comment. So thank you, Keith. I'm glad to
blame that one on you.
I'm glad. No, this was on the thing. I double checked, but I think there might have been a question that was supposed to happen at some point. But at any rate, that's awesome, Keith. Keep on teaching people how to play. We'll get your question next time if there was supposed to be one. Seth says, 1, how y'all feel about Clear the Mind? Is it a real build around? Is it playable outside of that? We talked about that. And then he says, Seth says, Ben S. hosted streamer Deathsea last night, who was soft forcing Clear the Mind to good success, but I'm not sure if it's an arena specific thing. So again, we talked about that. Question number 2, who on Team CFB is most likely to play Dimir at the Mythic Championship?
Oh, Matt Nass for sure. Because both of us drafted it once, and Matt, I think Matt enjoyed it.
He really thought it was good. Okay. Thomas says, I feel like there are fewer clear signpost cards in each guild in Ravnica Legion compared to guilds of Ravnica when you're looking for an open guild. I find myself just having to make a bet on a guild and then not seeing anything clearly open before pack 2. What are your thoughts on this, and what implications might it have for the format? No, I don't think I agree with it. The gold cards really are signposts, and when they show up,
gold
you
cards
should pay
are kind of
attention.
intrinsically signposts.
Yeah, that's just what they are.
Yeah. It's not like Shark to Crab necessarily says like you need to draft a bunch of counter synergies. It's just like, wow, this card's really powerful. I really want to be Simic.
Yeah. So I think just make sure to pay attention to those gold cards, Thomas, and it'll guide you even stronger. Kyle says, hi guys, I have a question about the Team CFB testing process. Given a lot of folks likely used Arena for preparation, were there any disagreements about specific cards or strategies that emerged from people's differing experiences in terms of how they prepared? Did Ben S. go off the deep end? Thanks.
Well, luckily for our sanity, Ben wasn't there. I joke. I actually do like talking with Ben S. quite a bit.
Yeah.
It can be difficult in a meeting with 15 people.
Yeah.
To kind of get that, make sure that's on the rails. So this is an interesting question because we were pretty clear going in that arena-only limited feedback was not going to be something, or not that we weren't going to care about it, but we were going to be very precise about what you were trying to get out of it.
Yeah, because you know how the cards work at that point. You've got a lot of experience playing in the format, but the draft portion is not 100%.
So this is the way I kind of explained it. Like the goal, the kind of game you're playing when you're drafting on Arena. A large part of it, especially for people exactly who kind of fit into our listener class, a lot of people who listen have we're the Nuts and Bolts Spike podcast, that sort of thing, is to find which cards or strategies the bots undervalue and lean on those.
Yes.
I know that that's what a ton of people do.
Yep. We've even talked about it on the show.
That is part of the optimal strategy for defeating Arena, right? For having the most success on Arena is figuring out the cards and strategies that you can have access to and get good versions.
And I know all of them. I mean, you open up the what's his name, the red black uncommon. It's like that thing's coming back.
Yep.
Bots don't care about that card.
Yep.
Just for whatever reason,
And that is a fun game. A lot of people enjoy it. A lot of people continue to enjoy it. I enjoy it. Nothing wrong with it. This is not a judgment. That is not good preparation for sitting down at a table with 7 other people.
It so far, right? I mean,
that's a different game.
You do get to learn things, right? Like during the gameplay.
If the question is, will drafting on Arena make you better at Magic? The answer is yes.
Yes.
Unquestionably.
Yes. But not as good as drafting
Will drafting on Arena prepare you for a draft at a Mythic Championship or the top 8 of a PTQ? No. I don't.
It helps. I mean, you would take that over nothing, but it's not as good as you can get.
No. If you're going for optimum preparation, that's not the best way to do it.
No.
And we were very aware of that. So going in, people who drafted mainly on Arena were aware of the implications of that, and they were aware that we had this discussion of like, what can we learn from Arena? What things are dangerous to take away from that? Like, we still came to the conclusion that you should probably first pick Gate Gloss if you open it, because I think the card's really good. Mm-hmm. We were aware that you were not going to get the 12 nut gate deck, and that factored into our feedback. So, no, we didn't have any big disagreements about Arena, but that's because we already kind of hashed it out beforehand. And, yeah, I mean, look, there's a number of people, professional players who, are playing in this tournament who practice 100% on Arena.
Yeah.
So take that for what it will.
It's dangerous.
It's worth doing if that's
isn't that frustrating? Like if I was on a team, let's say it was me and 6 other people, and I said, okay, Arena's convenient and fun and all these things, but I'm testing for a Mythic Championship. I'm on Magic Online and I'm testing in real life, and somebody shows up and it's like, I'm only going to test on Arena. I would be like, well, you're not really pulling your weight, right?
Well,
I mean, they're not contributing as much as I would be.
Well, not everyone contributes the same amount, and they contribute in different ways.
Okay. But I mean, if it's just a difference of opening up a different program, can we just do that?
Like, the only time it's different, I guess, is if you're like maybe a limited specialist who your role on the team is to help with limited,
theory,
and all you did is draft Arena and then skip the limited meeting. Well,
that would be different. Okay.
Then maybe we'd have some questions. No, I do think that it can still foster good discussion, and I have found it to be useful. Like, there are people on the team who drafted only Arena who I had good discussions about limited with. It's not a complete different game. This is there is less.
But again, we're talking about optimal here.
Yeah, I mean, when we're talking about playing for $50,000, then yes, I want optimal. That's how I operate.
Right, and the whole point of you being on a team is that you're leveraging each other's work.
I mean, 80% of my drafts were on Magic Online, probably 20% on Arena.
Yeah.
And I felt like that was a good ratio in terms of getting what I wanted out of both those programs.
Okay.
And to be fair, some of the 20% Arena were because I was streaming it, which I find much more fun to do.
Yeah. But then you use full nonsense. Matthew Taylor says, Marshall, how do you plan to focus on coverage with the limited tournament happening next door? Great question, Matthew. This is at a Magic Fest. This is the first time we've had professional, in this case, a Mythic Championship happening in the same weekend. I mean, I'll be fine if there's a big wall in between, but it does feel kind of weird. Like, I'd love to skip over there and, crack open.
I'm registered for GP Cleveland. I really hope I don't play.
Yeah, hopefully not.
For those unaware of the schedule, the only way I can play in GP Cleveland is if I fail to day 2 of the Pro Tour, which I do hope is not the case.
Yeah, I hope not. And Matthew says, speaking of which, I'll be huddled over my podcast app Friday night, attempting to soak up any good strategic vibes before participating in that very tournament myself. Sweet, Matthew. That's awesome. Any last-minute advice for a first-time GP participant? We've talked about this a bit on the show.
Yeah, I think one thing to do, Matthew, is when you build your seal deck, bring enough sleeves that you can make multiple versions.
Yeah.
And try and talk with your friends, ask for advice, try to figure out the optimum build, because you're not going to get it right.
No.
I'll just tell you that right now. I've never had a seal deck that at the end of workshopping it with other people I know.
I've gotten so close, man. But it never... I'm always like, I should have played one more, whatever.
Yeah, I should have played one less mountain, or maybe, man, this card my 23rd card was a little better if I switched it to this.
Yep.
And sometimes it's like, I actually think you should have been white-black when you built a Rakdos deck.
And hopefully that isn't the case, but yeah.
But have that, make sure that you get advice, because once you build and submit your sealed deck, it's totally legal and encouraged to get advice from your friends about how you should sideboard into it. When it comes to post-board games.
Yeah, my advice, Matthew, is also sideboard related, which is don't be afraid to change the like there's so many playables now that like if you want to lower your curve as a sideboard, it doesn't have to be exposed to daylight. That's your only sideboard option. You can also change like how many 2-drops you have and that kind of stuff. Good luck at the tournament, Matthew. Come say hi as well. Jason says, I'm curious about deck composition of decks in this format. My usual heuristic is I go for 17 creatures, 6 spells, and 23 lands. Okay, that's a fine starting point. Got to be flexible on that, but that's fine. I diverge from these numbers as the draft goes on.
I think you said 23 lands.
Oh, yeah, this isn't right.
I would advise against that.
This is 17 creatures, 6 spells, 23 lands. So what do they mean?
They mean 17 lands.
17 lands.
6 spells and 17 creatures.
Yes. Okay, they just added up everything wrong. All right, cool. Yes. Good.
Unless they actually mean 23 lands, in which case we're going to help quite a bit by recommending you cut 6 lands. You came to the right place here, Jason. Anyway, they wrote it incorrectly, but that's what they meant. Well, I diverge from these numbers as the draft goes on. For example, increase my spell count if I have more removal spells, and I find that those are more available. In Ravnica Legion's format, I seem to be running a few less creatures and a few more spells than I would normally. Am I just noticing this now? Am I just noticing this, that I do this now, that I'm aware of it, and it isn't happening as often in RNA as I think, or have you noticed this as well? I don't really pay attention to this.
I don't either, actually. Although I would, if I had to guess, I would say I run fewer creatures.
Look, we did an episode on heuristics. I love heuristics. Heuristics, general guidelines are really useful, and 17-6-17 is like a pretty good breakdown. But any deck is just going to be completely fine if you play 13 creatures, you play 20 creatures. Like, it just depends on the cards you have, the quality of each of those categories, and kind of what your deck wants. If you have a Guardian project, you're going to want to run like 18 creatures because that makes your creatures better. If you have a Dovin's Acuity, you're going to run like 7 creatures because you don't need them, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so just pay attention on a case-by-case basis for that one. Robert says, people are liking this format a lot, so my question is, what does RNA have in common with other great limited sets?
Well, it's not... I don't think
it has balance. Like, that's the thing that comes to mind.
Yeah, I think that, like, making it so each guild or combination is viable is pretty important. Like, when it's 10 color combinations, I've talked about this before, they don't all 10 need to be viable. If 8 are viable, that's still pretty good.
7 or 8,
for guilds, because there's only 5, all 5 need to be viable for it to be a really great limited format.
And we got 3 in Guilds of Ravnica, but all 5 here.
Yeah.
Another thing that I would say is a pattern of really popular formats are legitimate build-arounds, which we have. Yeah. We have actually multiples of those. The idea that you can explore a space that you haven't yet is really exciting. Even a stupid deck like Clear the Mind is a thing, but you add things like the Gates deck or High Alert, and boom, you've got a legit build around. I wish that Cavalcade of Calamity was like slightly better because that would be a much different look at a build around, but I still haven't actually been able to make that work. Kevin says, hey guys, I've really been enjoying RNA, but often have a hard time determining what's open, specifically on Arena. Sometimes I see good picks that I don't think should be open as late as pick 6 or 7, and I wonder if I'm drafting the wrong guild or if something else is open. How late should I keep looking for signals, and when is a good rule of thumb to commit to a color or guild? And, this goes back to what you mentioned in the thing where I think you can, pick 5, pick 6, you're willing to
pick 5, pick 6. Like this is a deep format. There's a lot of playables, so I think pick 5 or 6 is about when I'd want to be locking it down. But,
and of course, from the big picture perspective, you have to be thinking, okay, if I give up, let's just say you scrap your first 5 picks and you take that. I mean, that means you get 2/3 of the first pack plus all of the second pack and all of the third pack to pick up the cards that you want. If you knew at that point that you were in the open guild, you would do it for sure. Yeah. Even if you had some pretty good stuff to start off with. Daniel says, what, if anything, does Ill-Gotten Inheritance teach us about card evaluation going forward? I think this card ended up way higher than any of us would have guessed during previews, even if it's overvalued currently. Do we need to change any heuristics we already have for evaluating, quote, do-nothings, or is it just a one-off strangely good card? Good question.
Yeah, I don't tend to see any individual card being overrated or underrated as a reason to revisit everything we do.
Agreed.
One thing that I think is good to pay attention to is it's useful to compare cards to previous versions of said cards.
Yep.
But that is one of your blind spots. That is a way to introduce errors because it's for the sake of convenience more than it is for...
Yeah. It's super interesting to do that.
Well, it's not just convenience. It's also, I guess, leveraging the what we know about those earlier cards.
Yeah, but it's mainly based on time. It's like you want to be able to do this relatively quickly and have a starting point. And these type of like ping at you, drain you cards are always bad. They've always been bad. But this one's good. And, I think that part of the reason is that the format isn't super fast. People are playing 3-color decks and such. And also, that last hit is huge. The 8-point life swing that you get for that 6 mana that you basically always get to do if you cast it, that's a meaningfully big impact on the game that it's hard to gauge unless you've actually played with the card.
Well, also, the Rakdos Guild, unsurprisingly, is aggressive, which I think we all knew from looking at the cards, but how much this helps get the last 8 through was hard to see from the original card, because, again, the speeding it up by 4 turns by sacrificing it is a pretty big deal.
Yeah. Jacob said, hey guys, I had a question about High Alert. Luis has mentioned that it can be powerful in the right deck, but that you don't necessarily want to go all in and pick up junk trollers and stuff like that. Anything you wouldn't want to play if High Alert wasn't in your deck. However, isn't it the telltale sign of a build around that your deck is great when you draw it and not great when you don't? Why is it different than other build arounds that really warp your pick order list? Which is kind of interesting because this is a more middle ground build around in the sense that you can put it in most average Azorius decks, and it actually performs pretty well. And then if you just lean towards it, it's quite good.
Well, so the difference is your goal with build-arounds isn't to have a crap deck when you don't draw the build-around. That's just a byproduct of the power level of some build-arounds where, yes, when you draw this card, my deck is great, and when I don't, the deck's kind of mediocre. The difference here is that you don't have to do that with High Alert.
Yep.
You can build a deck.
Which makes it so much better, by the way.
Right. That's why it's actually an upside.
Yeah.
It's not that the deck relies on it, it's not that it's a bad thing that the deck relies on it. It's less. It's great that when you draw High Alert, your deck is great. When you don't, your deck is good.
Yeah.
That's a lot better than, when you draw whatever build around you're basing your deck off of, your deck is great, and when you don't, your deck is crap. Like I think Cavalcade of Calamity is a little bit more like that.
Yes.
Right, where
if you don't have the things that trigger it, it does stone nothing, and you're just like in a terrible spot, and you need a lot of them. You know what it actually reminds me of is a comparison to Constructed, where if you go back to Modern, for example, there's a lot of decks that are combo decks that have a really strong backup plan, right?
Yeah.
They banned Splinter Twin.
Splinter Twin was the best example. Exactly. Yeah. That's where I was going to go.
Yeah, and there's also the Obzon combo decks that used to use Birthing Pod but now use creatures and stuff.
Right, Collected Company.
Yeah, Collected Company and stuff where you can just play these valuable, good, strong creature plays, but then sometimes you go, oh, I got these 3 of them, you lose.
Right.
And this kind of feels like that, where it's it's a good plan, which is just to cast your creatures, cast your spells, and kill them. But sometimes you draw a High Alert, and it's like, oh, game's over. Just ends on the spot. So you get to kind of free roll that.
That's a lot better
rather than having to be completely committed
than to be, have 2/3 of Tron and be unable to cast a single spell.
Exactly. Next question is from Luis. This is Man-O-War Elves, by the way, one of our favorite names.
Oh yeah.
Hi folks. Thanks for all the great content. You're welcome, Luis. What are some of your favorite build arounds in the set? We've talked about that quite a bit. Is Calamity a valid build around?
I don't believe so.
Yeah, I think I'm just not. I like to use the community as my guinea pigs for this, right? And what I'll usually do with complicated cards like this or narrow cards like this is I will say, I think it's bad. Just at face value. So now you world have to beat me with this and make me change my mind, where I go, you know what? I thought it was bad, but I keep losing to it. That happened with Ill-Gotten Inheritance. I thought it was mediocre to bad. And then I'm like, you know what? That was really annoying and I lost to it. So now I start to respect the card. And I want to see the same thing out of Cavalcade. So no. Louis says, is Dovin's Acuity a card worth building around? Or will it fit fine in any blue-white deck? It doesn't really fit either of those. It is worth building around. It does not fit fine into any blue-white deck, but most blue-white decks it does, because they have, between 4 and 6 instants, and that's enough in most cases. So don't be afraid to put it in as just a value card rather than having to commit to a full build around for Dovin's Acuity. Adam says, this question is for the tall gentleman.
Well, there's no one here who's tall and a gentleman, but we can let Marshall field it anyway.
Do you think at times that when the bots are solved, it might be better to draft a deck that is best against the strongest drafted deck? I find deck to draft. I find myself in so many mirrors that I wonder if I should be thinking about going one level deeper. Is this genius or fancy play syndrome? If you have that much control over which deck you do.
It's a good inclination, but it's not like when we say the bots are solved, it means some strategies are undervalued, but it also doesn't guarantee anything.
No.
Sometimes it's just going to be right to be Azorius or right to be Rakdos,
right.
Or whatever. And limited formats, it's not like matchups in Constructed. There's not that much you can get out of it. Like, there's not... yes, I think I would rather... Like, if I knew I was playing against the Nut Gate deck, 5 out of my 7 rounds... Rakdos would probably give you the best chance of victory, but that doesn't mean you should force Rakdos.
Right, because that's not how the draft
sometimes
part works.
Simic's going to be open.
Right. If Rakdos isn't open, even if you want to be in it, that doesn't mean that you get to just say, well, I'm just going to do this.
So it's a good inclination. It's looking for loopholes, but I don't think there's one here.
Yeah, it just doesn't work that way because you can't choose what you want to draft. Andre says, what's the worst misplay you've done so far in the set? Greetings from Sweden. God, I've made some really embarrassing ones.
I know mine. So, at the beginning of the format, I thought Depose Deploy that made 2 Thopters was a sorcery, so I kept casting on my main phase. And my stream was like yelling at me, like, no, it's an instant. I'm like, oh yeah, dumb. So then later, I thought Consume Consecrate was an instant, and Consume is a sorcery that makes them sack their biggest creature. So I passed with Consume up when they had a 5/5, and then had no other cards I could cast. So instead of consuming their 5/5, gaining 5, they hit me for 5, I played no spell, then they played another creature, and I lost that game badly.
Oh, that's brutal. Yeah, for me, it was... I had a Gate Colossus and once again had forgotten about its,
little ability.
Yeah, the ability for the smaller creatures. And the chat's like, okay, well, you have lethal. And we were way ahead, right? So I missed it. So I'm like, oh, it's fine. We'll just kill him next turn. Like, I had tons of life.
They acted treason to you.
No problem. So they didn't act a treason. They attacked me with a bunch of stuff or something. I can't remember. And I'm like, okay, but that's fine. Like, I'm still at 6. It's fine. And they're like, tap red. Do 3 to you, and I'm like, they skewered me, and then they skewered me again, and I'm just like,
yeah.
Like, talk about maximum punishment. Carter says, hi, Marshall and Luis. There was a recent announcement at the limited portion of the next Mythic Championship in London will be War of the Spark draft, and will happen before the set is officially released, which is true. What's your opinion on this?
Great. Love it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, how cool is that to push that up as close as... I mean, this benefits you, listener, right? Like, if you happen to be there, all the stuff that we talk about with card evaluation, everything you've learned from the set reviews about how we approach this helps you
test
so
your
much.
true skills.
Yeah, it really is. A comparison to this would be like, what's it called? Luis, he's giving me hand signals now. No, you're going to sit there and you're going to finish this show, and you're not getting your phone from me either. Would be Chaos Draft, right? Where if you haven't actually drafted that set, you have to sit there and like figure out what the cards do on the fly. As a follow-up, how would you go for preparing for such an event with such high stakes without being able to actually draft the set beforehand?
First of all, I think you'll have 2 days to draft the set on Arena.
Okay.
I believe.
So be one of those people.
Yeah, I would say do that. And then, try to dust off your card evaluation skills. Try to figure out like what the different mechanics implied are good. I mean, it's going to be tricky. Like, look at, it's kind of funny. Look at how often we get cards wrong in set reviews. And, I think our hit rate's pretty good and we get plenty of cards wrong. It's just how it is.
Yeah.
And it's going to be difficult, but I think that's awesome. I think it gives people who are motivated and ready to tackle this a pretty good advantage, because there's going to be some people who are just going to open their packs having not really seen the cards before and not thought about it, and you can put in a little bit of legwork those previous couple days and you'll be really ahead.
I think that's really the litmus test, right? Because we don't live under the delusion that we're going to go 100 for 100. We're trying to get an edge on the field. So if we do 85 out of every 100 cards where we feel like good about our evaluation before and even after having played it, and your average person does 60, playing Fog and Wilderness Reclamation and stuff, thinking like these are great, then you have a big edge. Andrew says, first of all, thanks for continuing to level up my game. You're welcome. I've been listening for about a year, and it means a lot to me to have consistent tutoring for Magic. Question: if you are drafting some 2-color good stuff deck, or even more specific deck like High Alert, then you take a Colossus Pack 2, and then you see a Ram later in Pack 2. He says, disclaimer, I mostly draft on Arena. How hard do you tilt? I am prone to I have 2 bombs and should go for broke on Gates logic, thinking that now I'm suddenly in the market for up to 5 colors. I can just take powerful cards and see the Gates. Does this equation work? How do we weigh the allure of powerful Gates deck against the game plan we had going? Many thanks from Northampton.
Well, I think that the Gates deck's open enough on Arena that you often should be doing the switch. The part that I do think is not exactly optimal is you don't actually need to play 5 colors. In fact, you probably shouldn't. Most of my successful Gate decks are essentially 3 colors with maybe a splash or 2.
Yeah, same.
But Teamer
I
gates.
mean, I'm always 4, I guess, but you don't have to be 5.
No, and Teamer gates and Esper gates, especially with a base color pair, is really important.
Yep.
Like, it's different to be like, well, I'm all 5 colors, go for broke, versus I'm base blue-green, and then I have cards of all the colors in addition to that. It is different, because you're less likely to get screwed, because if you draw your primary colors, you can cast most of your cards.
Looks like we've got about 5 more questions here. This one comes from Douglas, who says, is blocking in this format bad?
No, blocking's pretty good.
Not at all. It's totally fine. How good are the big mana decks? Am I supposed to only play Locket in Orzhov, or is it okay in Simic too?
It's not that great in Simic.
Yeah, it's just okay.
Simic has mana sinks. Orzhov just runs out of cards to play and things to do, whereas Simic does not.
Yeah. Jeff says, hey, Marshall and Luis, as I've been diving deeper into Limited, I've been comparing the card archetype evaluations of other pros and other content creators. The biggest difference in evaluation I've noticed on LR itself is ORAT inverted guild rankings versus Marshall and Luis's. While I've really been enjoying drafting blue-white and black-white, I think Owen's rating helped me get my first ever 3-0 with a Gruul deck I may not have had confidence in had I not heard his perspective. How much do you think preferred playstyle affects archetype rankings? Great question. Ideally, not a lot. Like when you do rankings, you're attempting to do it, agnostic of your personal playstyle, but that's also kind of impossible. So how much does it affect it? Hopefully marginally.
I don't think a lot. I mean, maybe I'd like to think I'm, unbiased calculation machine, but the reality is I do a lot of drafts preparing for these tournaments, and my goal is not to play a deck I'm comfortable with. My goal is just to play the deck that has the highest win percentage.
Yeah,
and
I'm the same. And I mean, when
look
I
how many
draft on
times
my
I've
stream,
sleeved up White Weenie for a Pro Tour. It's not about it.
You've actually crushed the Pro Tour with White Weenie over the years, which is weird because that's not what you're known for.
That's just not what I want to be doing.
Yeah.
Exactly. But I mean, I like winning. So.
Yeah, same. Also, it is a little tough because of the content creation game, because like a lot of people watch us on our streams or videos, and
the incentives there are very different.
Yeah, it's a little different there. Tyler says, thanks for everything you guys do. You're welcome, Tyler. I'm curious to the widest spread of rankings in Unlimited meeting, as well as any Ben S moments. So you mentioned that Ben didn't show up.
Yeah.
Was there any cards that were particularly like, hey, you have this way up here, I have it way down at the bottom?
Yeah, Plague White, a member of our team who will remain nameless was like, isn't Plague White unplayable? And Martin Yuzo was like, no, I think you mean unblockable. So that was a pretty good one.
That's great. That's really good. This one's from Taylor, who says, is there a case which you open Ethereal Absolution in Pack 2 and don't try to play it?
Yeah, I actually posted on Twitter this Gruul deck I was drafting, the Simic deck I was drafting, where I opened Absolution Pack 2 and looked at my cards and looked at the Absolution and just took, a much worse card. I think I don't remember what it was, like a Skitter Eel or something.
Yeah.
I think my deck ended up better as a result.
Yeah, you look, Taylor, this stuff happens all the time, especially for double colored cards like the Dragon or the Slime or whatever. If you're not in those colors and you're just off it, you can just pick good cards. It still matters even if you have more gates.
You still play games of Magic and try to win them with your commons.
Yep. Michael says, if you're in the Gates deck, do you ever try to play the CCDD cards?
You can. It really depends on your gate layout, but I think that I'm more likely to play ones that are good later in the game, like Bellhaunt or Select Sunder Shaman, as opposed to like Frilled Mystic, which is really punishing.
Is so timing specific.
Yeah.
Yeah, I play it anyway. I don't care. Oh, by the way, Michael says, longtime listener, played with you at the listener draft at PAX episode 300. Still the highlight of my Magic career, LOL. I remember that. Do you remember, Michael? Yeah, that was really good fun. We did that quiz and all that. Last question comes from Pablo, who says, hey, Marshall and LSV, in the episode where you had the ORAT on the show, although he spelled it ORAD, which I kind of like, I asked him about his take on the best, most efficient card in Ravnica Allegiance. He said, Skargan Hellkite. Do either of you think differently? I love your show and awesome content. Thank you much for all you do. You're welcome, Pablo. I don't know. What's the most efficient card in Ravnica Allegiance?
Efficient?
Yeah, I don't really know how to...
Like, Skewer is really efficient.
Yeah.
If you're asking
what
the...
mana for 3 damage.
I think like the three best cards are Ethereal Absolution, Hydroid Krasis, and Skargan Hellkite, but I actually don't know the order, because it doesn't really matter. You're not really comparing them against each other.
No. But yeah, sure, all of those cards are completely busted. I agree with you on efficiency. Also, one of the most consistently efficient cards is Grotesque Demise. It just consistently kills things that cost more mana than it does, and that's kind of the definition. All right, that's going to do it for this one. Thank you so much for our patrons for the questions. Again, if you want to be able to submit questions for our Q&A episodes that we do, or for when we have guests, or if we want to talk about a specific topic, we'll often turn to our patrons for that. It's a bonus. It's a perk that you get for being a patron. And any level, and you'll see it when I post it, and you can post it in there, and we get to as many as we could. We couldn't quite get to all the questions here, but thank you so much for those. Yeah, it's kind of brutal, isn't it? I wonder if you could change that. But thank you.
I'm not giving you $1 a show so I can look at the questions you're going to ask me.
You get some of it. But yeah, so thanks a lot for everybody for chiming in with your questions. We do appreciate it. Luis? Good luck tomorrow, man. Kill it. Everybody's going to be rooting for you.
Yeah, hopefully maybe this time I'll run good for once.
Oh, God. That is going to do it for this episode. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR, and Luis is LSV. As he mentioned, he will be posting updates from his tournament as he goes along, from the Mythic Championship and then the GP on Saturday. So
hopefully not.
And then the booth on Sunday.
Oh yeah, action-packed weekend.
The full weekend going back and forth.
I will say, as much as I love all the things I do at these events, I don't have time to lick my wounds. When I do bad, it's like
we snatch you off the tournament floor, and then it's me, you, and Paul in the booth. Yep. You don't get any. In fact, I remember one time you came in the booth after you did top 8.
Yes,
and you lost in the top 4.
I lost it to Owen in the top 4.
In the top 4.
And then I did commentary on the finals match.
And then you just popped in. I'm like, are you sure you're okay? You're like, yeah, I'm good. I'm just like, you are insane. Anyway, hopefully we don't work with you this time around. But good luck tomorrow. Channelfireball.com. Make sure you check them out. I mentioned it before, but trading your cards into them is one of the great ways to kind of stay ahead of the game when it comes to Magic. Magic's an expensive hobby, as everybody knows. And one of the ways you can get ahead is by trading your old cards in that you're not using. You can get a 30% trade-in bonus for Channel Fireball if you want to get store credit. And that's just great. You can also get cash if you prefer that at the straight value. And, of course, make sure you check out the awesome free content right on the front page. And we will see you at GPLA. Again, it's Luis, myself, Riley, and Huey bringing you coverage of Modern from LA. So really looking forward to that. And that is next weekend from the time of this recording. So should be fun. Twitch.tv/Channel Fireball for that. And that's going to do it for this one. We'll see you next week.
It's funny that you mentioned Paul Cheon, of course, because I had dinner with him today. And listeners, especially who have started consuming Magic content more recently, might remember that Paul had a Magic stream. In fact, a quite successful and very good one.
Really good stream.
And now he works at Wizards of the Coast, so he does developer streams, but he doesn't have the time to do his own personal stream. And as a member of R&D, I don't even know if he's supposed to. But
yeah, it's a shame too because his stream was really good.
His stream had some really good moments, and I thought about them. I think the all-time best streaming moment from Paul was when he top decked Karn to win his game of Modern, threw his hands up in the victory sign, which knocked his headphones off and F6'd his turn. And as and it's a super tight game, and he drew the perfect card, and as he's processing that he just passed the turn without doing anything to lose, his son Kyle comes over and pees on him.
That is an all-timer.
It's so good.
Just a classic.
Another stream moment is
Kyle.
When Paul used to stream and he'd be playing in the constructed queues, I would be joining the queues with decks that were designed to beat the deck Paul was playing.
So funny when you did that.
He would be playing
what was it? There was one that you did that was so funny. It was Demir. You built some. God, I wish I could remember now. I was watching as this was happening. I think you might have even messaged me or something.
Well, at one point he had a deck with Liliana. He was playing Jund or something.
Yeah.
And he plays Liliana in +1s, and I put an obstinate bailout to play. Main deck, of course.
Yeah, obviously.
And people would notice because when I would make videos for Channel Fireball, they would see my decks tab when I was about to play a constructed deck. And it was like anti-chi on white-green, anti-chi on blue-black, anti-chi on whatever. And I would just make all these decks for whatever Paul was playing on stream, just like the hard counter to his deck.
But you had to label them so you didn't actually play them against somebody else.
I couldn't actually play those in the queue. They weren't real decks. They were just so you'd play combo, and I'd play a deck with 4 duress, 4 negate in my deck.
Yeah.
And just completely get him. And I think overall the best moment on Paul's stream really was when he did an impromptu 24-hour stream because people kept donating and subscribing, and he had
some
raised a ton of money and got a ton of subs, and he was really he broke down. It was just so much community support, and even though Paul ultimately did move on to taking a job for WotC, I knew that the stream did support him and his family for a solid 2 years, and he really loved how much the community kind of helped him in that. And even though streaming Magic is a much bigger game now and more lucrative and all those things, I do think it's worth remembering, people like Paul and Numot Kenji, who's still quite successful and doing even better now, but these guys really did stream before anyone else was really streaming full time to the same degree.
When it wasn't worth it for a while. Totally.
So I don't know. I was just reminded of these moments, and even though Paul, I think, continues to do a ton of good for Magic, I think he does impact a lot more people now as a member of Play Design and all the things he's doing at WotC. I do think that it's a little less visible, and those stream moments were really, really good. And I do miss his stream. I was, sub for 4 years or something like that.
Yeah.
So.
Or with that in mind, let's go grab him and do a mukbang.
Yeah, mukbang. for those who don't know, it's social eating. It's basically when you stream yourself eating disgusting amounts of food. So.
In?
Yeah, well, yeah, obviously. I think that was implied by the description of the activity.